Red on red. Halfway there, red shirt, black sleeves.
Okay.
Felicetti picked up both his losses early on in this tournament, was on quite a win streak here. Had to win consecutive rounds to make it into day two. Now picking up a win in the first match of Sunday as well. Ted really started performing on the SCG Tour Season 3 last year, made a run at the Players' Championship. Ended up not making it. You see right now, number 3 on our leaderboard.
Yeah, really strong technical player.
Yeah, and you know, this is the kind of deck I'd expect Ted to be on. Really, his MO is that he plays the good cards and the best deck. I think for this weekend, 4-color control seems pretty good. Starts off on Badlands into Deathrite Shaman.
And we had not previously covered Ted playing Legacy, but he has some nice cards. You see the black bordered Badlands there.
Now you see he's against some sort of unfair deck here. Lotus Petal, Ancient Tomb, turn 1. It's going to be Blood. Oh, he could go Blood Moon, but he's thinking bigger. Seething Song makes 5 red. It's more lock pieces than just that. He's going to go Blood Moon. Yeah, that Force of Will check, Nathaniel's going to pass. And Chalice of the Void on 1.
That's a pretty good first turn.
There you go. Have a bunch of mountains and don't play any more cards. This is the joy of the mono red deck.
Attack for 1, your turn. Ted really doing a great job at mounting an offense here.
We put Nathaniel down to 16. Now what the big red deck does is because it actually plays lands, unlike Charbelcher, sure, it kind of has a big turn 1 and then does nothing. But eventually Nathaniel will actually just make mana sources and cast his spells for real.
Ted's really going to need to produce some lands that can make non-red mana, but where we see a couple basic lands in other builds, I'm not seeing any of that in his deck. He's just heavy on dual lands. He has 4 Underground Seas, where you'd see 2 or 3 on some other lists, but I don't see an island or a swamp here.
What are the words on all? Why isn't So tries for Sneak Attack. That one's Force of Will. Ted had found one then. Now he's going to go for Godo Bandit Warlord.
If he didn't play a lot of Kamigawa block constructed or Commander, may not have seen this card. This was the original Stoneforge Mystic. Red and 5, 3/3, tutor for an equipment.
Yeah, you see, he had to use Seething Song to play and to get up to it. Those 2 mana lands are just mountains thanks to the multiple Blood Moons that Nathaniel's cast.
Godo also has the built-in ability to give you another combat step if it's able to attack for the first time a turn.
He untaps himself and all your Samurai.
Ted casts the only spell that he has access to given this Blood Moon, Lightning Bolt to take care of Godo, but that Batter Skull is likely to close this game out on its own.
So I am wondering here, Ryan. Godo is not a Samurai. He's a Barbarian. Why is he untapping my Samurai?
You know, sometimes you make strange bedfellows when you're fighting a war. They were, after all, the conflict was not bandits versus samurai.
No,
it was humans
the
versus
Kami
spirits.
War. Yeah. Yeah. And because Ted was never at any point here able to get a land into the graveyard, his first land of the game was Badlands. So it means this Deathrite Shaman that he put into play doesn't have any fuel. I suppose there was a point at which maybe Ted could have started building up lands, cards to hand size, and discarding lands to his Deathrite Shaman. I know that's horrible. I don't know if there's another way for him to make colored mana.
Realistically, to cast a lot of the spells that he needs to cast, he needs to first use a Deathrite Shaman to cast a second Deathrite Shaman to really get access to enough material to really play the game.
And Nathaniel Red takes the first game. The turn 1 double lock piece draw, too much for Felicetti to overcome, and eventually a Batter Skull finishes the job. 1-0 for Mono Red. All right, one good. So, almost as importantly as we look at our sideboards for Ted is not just going to be what cards he boards in, but now that he knows his matchup, he can be much more intelligent about mulliganing.
Yes, and also leading on those early fetch lands. Unfortunately, again, Ted cannot search for basic lands, so he really needs to fight over Blood Moon very aggressively.
Yeah, 4 copies of Blood Moon in Nathaniel's deck. No copies of Magus of the Moon, so it's not Imperial Painter amount level of trying to cheese out your opponent? Well, it is, but just in a lot of different ways.
Post sideboard, he goes a little heavier on Blood Moon effects. You see 2 Magus of the Moon in the sideboard, though.
All right, so on Nathaniel's side, I guess we'll start there. Do you think he brings those in? He's got different block pieces, and this is pretty common. So 3 Trinispheres and 2 Magus of the Moons. He can go for those. He has cards like Sudden Shock, Sulfur Elemental, Ingot Chewer, Boil. These are for different those are for, imagine, other matchups.
His sideboard is actually, there's a lot of cards where you see a lot of modern sideboards that are specifically for certain matchups. The Trinispheres are going to be for your Storm combo kind of matchups. The Sudden Shocks are going to be more for Infect. You might see them come in here just to deal with Deathrite Shaman to make your Blood Moons even more effective. More Magus than the Moon seems reasonable, seeing how many dual lands you saw. You don't necessarily know how many basics your opponent has, so maybe you stay away from these. Pyromancy is largely for the Miracles matchup. This is a permanent that can actually kill them. Ingot Chewer obviously doesn't really play here. Kozilek's Return doesn't do a lot, and Boil is medium, but it might come in because the 4-color control deck does play a good amount of islands. Certainly, if you're trying to Blood Moon your opponent, Basic Island is one of their better cards if they have it, so it makes some sense.
So then we go to Ted's side. He has to fight back against these lock pieces, and actually his sideboard is pretty medium at doing that. A lot of these cards are trying to fight fair matchups.
Yeah, he has cards that can fight counter wars, just not against the spells he's playing against. Again, he has red Elemental Blast, not blue Elemental Blast, where if he plays a mirror, the red blast is great. Here, it just doesn't play at all. So he has 2 Flusterstorms. Those are largely going to fight over Seething Song, which is kind of awkward, but it can come up on certain turns and is totally reasonable. If he's able to get a Blood Moon into the graveyard, Surgical Extraction will play, and he might even have to play that route because he has no basic lands. Vendilion Click, if you're able to buy some time, seems totally reasonable. Thoughtseize is great, but that's really about all he's looking at.
Yeah, so like I kind of said, as much as it's the sideboard, it's going to be Ted will be more intelligent about his mulliganing in the presumably here.
Right.
You know, okay, his opponent's going to Force of Will check him. Better have the Force of Will.
Yeah.
One thing where I don't like, though, when I'm looking at these 4-color control decks, they've been really good in fair fights, but as opposed to like a 4-color Delver or Sultai Delver, which is kind of where I think this list started. In Delver decks, you'll see Spell Pierces, you'll see Dazes. Ted Felicetti's deck has none of those cards.
Yeah. He has Force of Wills and just actual factual 1 counter spell, and that is generally going to be too slow for this matchup.
Sometimes we see players with Spell Snare. I know Oliver 2 playing multiple copies of it. Ted not on that, but even if he did have that as a second counter spell, that's...
Spell Snare is kind of stinky here too. It pretty much only hits Chalice of the Void on 1.
So what could be a favorable deck matchup here, I think, for Nathaniel Red. Normally, Mono Red can struggle against Force of Will decks, but I think he's the favorite.
Yeah, this is one of my preferred matchups when I'm playing a Delver deck. But
yeah, so in just under 2 weeks, we have the Amonkhet pre-release. This is happening all around the country. Now, we have, at Star City Games, have the Amonkhetty playmat to go with the Amonkhet pre-release. You can get this from our Creature Collection, both at Star City Games Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia, and at participating stores. So, Ted on the play here, turn 2, Baleful Strix to draw a card. Though, no basic, well, you mentioned no basic lands on the list. Nathaniel starting off on Double Mountain, and just a go. Nathaniel kept a 7 here.
This is a slow hand.
Yeah, normally Mono Red's doing something on turn 1. Or at least when I play against the deck, it's always on turn 1.
This build is more capable of playing Magic than Belcher. It's certainly not an honest deck by any stretch of the imagination, but it does have some permanents that are just reasonable.
Yeah, it looks like both Ancient Tomb and City of Traders in Nathaniel's hand. So sometimes this deck, as opposed to just running out a turn 1 lock piece, actually just accelerates into, say, you know, multiple Inferno Titans.
Inferno Titan certainly makes a joke of Baleful Strix if you get it on the table.
Yeah, and one of the nice parts about a card like that is when you're playing Legacy, a format where the removal spells are going to be, you know, Fatal Pushes, that kind of effect. Inferno Titan actually can be hard for a deck to remove.
Yes.
Here is City of Traders for Nathaniel. Simeon Spirit Guide, that makes up to 5 mana for the turn. He will go for Batterskull. A pretty tame 5 here. We'll see if Ted can answer. He'll Brainstorm.
He already had Force of Will in hand.
Yeah, I think he has Force of Will. What I imagine Ted's trying to do here is, of all the cards Nathaniel could cast, this is one of the least scary ones. He'd like to not spend his Force of Will on it.
You also, just by casting the Brainstorm, you get a better choice of which blue card to pitch.
He's going to get rid of Snapcaster Mage. Batterskull countered.
Ted does have Colligan's Command in his main deck. If those are still in the deck, if he can brainstorm into that, he can just not force and then Colligan's Command that on his turn.
Yeah, that would have been a lot nicer. Does have to use the force, which one of the hard parts about the mono red deck, especially when he's not ritualing into his spells, he's just casting them. And if that's the case, you know, Nathaniel can force Ted to have a force of. He can put Ted in a position where Ted needs to force of will every turn, and that's pretty hard for his deck to do.
Well, the top of Nathaniel's deck's been giving him a lot of air. He has multiple lands in his hand still from this point.
Yeah, draws Gristlebrand here.
No matter how many lands tap for 2, he actually can't cast Gristlebrand. All red sources and colorless sources in his deck.
Here comes another 5-mana spell. It is
Sneak Attack.
Sneak Attack. Another colorless floating, so you will have to use that mountain to sneak Gristlebrand through. But this is the situation. Ted had to force last turn and made up to force this turn as well. This is what I meant when I said I wasn't sure that if Ted was going to spend a force of will on Batterskull. Like, maybe you let Nathaniel have Batterskull and then save a force for this, because Sneak Attack resolving is trouble.
Well, I understand digging for Colligan's Command. Letting Batterskull resolve is probably just a losing proposition, though, if you don't have a direct answer to it. His clock is Baleful Strix, right? He can't actually just beat Batterskull heads up.
Sneak Attack activated. Here is Gristlebrand. It's the 7/7.
And he has made a land drop, but his deck, he has Lotus Petals, he has Simian Spirit Guide, so the draw 7 on Gristlebrand can enable him to have an even more explosive turn.
Keep in mind there's still 1 colorless mana floating if Nathaniel can find a way to use it. Could start another chain of rituals. Looks like he has boarded in Sudden Shock. Draws 7 more, goes to 4.
I saw a Simian Spirit Guide there. I don't know what he has for other large creatures. There is an Inferno Titan, I believe, at the front.
Yeah, that one's pretty reasonable.
Take care of that Baleful Strix.
So here's Lotus Petal. That's going to make a red mana. Here's Inferno Titan. 1 to Strix and 2 to Ted. Ted goes to 17. You know,
Actually,
yeah.
If he didn't kill the Strix, this would actually already be lethal.
Yeah, this is a swing for 16.
His leftovers include Sudden Shock, though. I don't foresee this being a problem, but Ted could double Lightning Bolt him from here.
Or he also has Godo, and he'll sneak attack Godo.
That's not bad.
He gets a second. Oh, wow. Yeah, he gets a second attack. Yeah, all right. And if Ted does not have a Lightning Bolt for this Godo, this is going to be game over. Godo goes and finds another copy of Batterskull.
And even if he does
it's not good.
have that, yeah, the Gristlebrand's going to gain him 7 life here. Yeah, so I suppose there was no way that he could play around the timing where Ted would have to have double Lightning Bolt. He has to have that right now.
As soon as Gristlebrand was in play, things got really ugly. Here's a swing. 3 damage to Ted, goes to 14. This is a lethal attack without the trigger.
I think that's a pretty common story. Things don't usually look good for your opponent when you control Gristlebrand. And Ted fetches up an Underground Sea. Don't know what he can really do from here, though. I think he might have a Dismember in his hand. So in theory, well, no, that doesn't really do enough. I don't. He's just too dead to leverage that card effectively.
Making sure understands just exactly what's happening here. So you see Dismember in Ted's hand. He might be able to survive this. I don't even know if he can survive this turn.
Given the third threat, he just can't.
You see Abrupt Decay, Dismember, Snapcaster Mage. These cards are far too fair for the board we're looking at.
Yeah, it was a slow start for Nathaniel, but he didn't really have to worry about it. The thing about the 4-color control deck is its clock is so anemic that Nathaniel has some time to draw into gas.
Well, I mean, we see that with 4-color and Miracles, right? Both of them have very slow clocks. Now, Miracles has a lock, and that can work against can work against this kind of strategy, but this, Snapcaster Mage flashed into play as a blocker. Snapcaster is going to block. Dismember is going to be cast on Godo. But Nathaniel's going to get another attack here, right?
Well, only the Godo untapped. So the Inferno Titan
okay.
and the Gristlebrand, they won't be able to attack again.
So he has another attack step, nothing he can do with it.
Now, in theory, after gaining 7 life, Nathaniel can draw 7 and Simian Spirit Guide in another creature before he attacks, right? I don't know how the timing on that works exactly.
Yeah, there's another full combat step. Ted down to 2.
He also just still has that Sudden Shock in his hand, so if he just has access to 2 more mana, which if he gets another turn, he will anyway.
Or he can just say go.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not gonna.
Doesn't have to do anything fancy.
No, but he's gonna get fancy. He has to have 7 more cards, down to 4. I don't think there's any fast mana here.
Nope.
Ted cannot bolt, snap, bolt. Well.
So that draw 7 that does put Nathaniel dead to double lightning bolt here. Ted has to have it right now. He's dead on the following turn to the Batter Skull and the Sudden Shock.
Everything.
Yeah, it's something else off the sneak attack. He's just very dead.
I think this is a little flashy, right? You see, he's going to go ahead and chalice on 0. Nathaniel probably didn't need to draw 7 more here.
No,
I don't think Ted can untap and win.
Right.
From 11 life. I guess it depends whether or not Nathaniel had the threats to, I don't even know. I was going to say to make a repeat sneak attack. We go to Ted. He's got Brainstorm, Ponder, and Abrupt Decay. He can decay the Germ token.
Well, Ted has to find a red source and 2 lightning bolts.
Colligan's Command. That's 1 red card. He needs 2. Or so he could blow up the Batter Skull into Nathaniel, and then he's close. He's almost certainly dead.
He can, well, yeah, the Lightning Bolt already has to be there in that selection. He just doesn't have the mana to cast Colligan's Command and another draw spell, because he only gets 1 more land drop. So he can't keep these 3 cards and win the game, right? I think he has to take fetch land, crack fetch, Brainstorm, and hope it's 2 Lightning Bolts exactly.
Sure.
Of which he plays exactly 2.
So you're saying there's a chance?
Yeah. Assuming both of those lightning bolts are still in his deck. Yeah, you can also just take Colligan's Command and hope that Nathaniel's out of stuff. Well, Nathaniel drew 21 extra cards on the previous turn.
Probably not out of creatures. Nathaniel's deck plays 15 creatures. And remember, at this point, you could even put Simian Spirit Guide in through a sneak attack and it would be lethal.
Well, Ted fetched for a non-red mana source, so we can't Brainstorm into lethal damage anymore.
Yeah, Nathaniel has the Sudden Shock in hand, which we know about. So if he gets to untap, the game will be over. Ted brainstorms.
Well, it's all garbage anyway. Couple lands and another Brainstorm.
Puts 2 back, fires off. Yeah, 1 more Brainstorm, looks 1 deeper. Not going to get there. Going to find him a Vendilion Click.
Yep, can't even cast that one anymore.
Nathaniel, the untap. Attacks with Batter Skull, Abrupt Decay, Sudden Shock. That's going to be game and match. Nathaniel red, playing red, moves to 9-2.